Hello, welcome to another SonicLAB. Yes, that's the Reface CS. If you saw my little intro of some sounds, you might have been surprised at some of the stuff that it does. I must admit, when I first saw the original demo that we did with Bert, it just didn't kind of grasp me in the same way, but I've been playing with it for a bit and it's actually got quite a lot to offer. So it's the same format as the DX, small little thing, very solidly built, speakers on either end of 6 watts. Unfortunately, yes, 3-octave MIDI key keyboard, which is quite small, and yes, it does inhibit, some playing styles. I find I'm fumbling a bit, but I'm no keyboard player, so I guess if you know what you're doing, you could probably adapt. But you can always play it from external keyboard if you need to, I suppose. But that's been one of the sort of big bugbears of many people with the CS. But I suppose it is what it is, so that's what I'm going to review. So it's white. This is a synthesizer that's based, as far as we know it, on the sort of AN sound engine. It's quite interesting. It's got no memories. It's a monophonic synthesizer, but it can also be polyphonic, up to 8 voices. And doesn't seem to be any discernible difference in quality from switching from mono and poly mode. In fact, when you go into poly mode is at the bottom, mono is the next switch up. These are sort of indented switches, and then as you go up, you can get varying degrees of portamento, but I'm probably getting a bit ahead of myself. It's the same form factor, as I said. It's got 6 AA batteries. It's also got these MIDI adapter on a little kind of mini DIN thing that allows you to plug MIDI in and out. It's also got a USB slot, which gives you MIDI I/O only. Now, one thing that is different about this one, obviously with the DX, you've got quite a lot of parameter access. With the CS, there is none. And as it comes out of the box, none of these controls will actually spit out MIDI CC. You can access it via system exclusive, but you need to go into MIDI controller mode. Now, I couldn't find anywhere for the life of me how to do this. So I phoned Yamaha, nobody seemed to know there, but I did actually find out. So in case you're wondering how to do it, you switch the thing off, you hold down the C key, and then you power it on. Then you get this little sequence of events. That means when it's flashing, that's not MIDI CC mode. It's not going to transmit MIDI CC. If I switch it off again, hold down the C key, the E key down the bottom here, switch it on again, these will come on and blink solid. So now you have MIDI CC, which outputs all of these controls over CC. As far as I can tell, they're just regular CC, so you could add some additional faders if you wanted to, although, as we can see, there's plenty on here. So let's take a look at what you get, what the actual controls are. Before I do, though, it's worth mentioning that, yes, we've only got this little pitch stick. I don't think I mentioned that in the DX review. There is no mod, though it does respond to mod, oops, pardon me, it does respond to mod over MIDI. So you can send it a MIDI CC of a controller modulation, and it will affect the depth, but you haven't got anything on the front panel to do it with. So starting along this end, obviously we've done the speaker and the pitch bend. We've got volume control, then we've got an octave shift. Now this is only for the keyboard, so if you hold a key down, it doesn't affect it. I'll turn that down a bit. Only affects it when you've switched the when you've had another key press on, if that makes sense. And while we're at it, in mono mode, it's last note priority. There may be ways of affecting that in the boot up key combinations, but I'm afraid I don't know what they are. We don't have that manual available just yet. Next section along is we've got the looper. It's the same as the DX. You can get into, you can clear the looper, you can go into record, play, pause and stop. Now, I have to say, it's almost useless, and I do say that with some sadness, because you have to be, when you're playing, you have to then reach over in record mode and then suddenly go into play, and it's really, really difficult to do that while you're playing, no matter where you are. So it's very hard to get a consistent loop. There may be some kind of foot switch or MIDI control that allows you to do that more fluently, but in this instance, I'm afraid the looper feels a little bit redundant. Where we've also got an LFO here. The LFO can be assigned off, amplitude, filter, pitch, and the oscillator. If I just we go to a straight sawtooth wave, go into poly mode. What's interesting about this, if I go to amplitude, we can get a reasonable depth. It sounds like a triangle wave, but it goes right up into audio rates, which is a bit of an unexpected groovy treat. Usually, you know, on a synthesizer that appears on the surface to be this basic, you know, you wouldn't get that, but it does go right up there. So you've got an additional sort of ring modi kind of possibilities there. Destinations for the LFO are amplitude, filter, pitch, and the oscillator, and with the oscillator there are different kinds of oscillator waves, and they have a different texture and modulation. So depending on what it is, will depend on what it modulates, if that makes sense. Again, quite simple, fixed wave, nothing more going on here. Where the fun really starts is in this oscillator. Now the oscillator has 5 waves, sorry, and they all have very different characteristics. We'll start with sawtooth. Just starts to alias right up in the top there. But where you get the modification, this is quite common in a number of synths these days, where you get a wave and then you get sort of variations on each wave depending on which wave you're using. In the CS, the texture brings in a sub-oscillator. A mod creates a kind of detune. Yes, that is kind of super saw, isn't it? But it's one of the palette of sounds, but don't despair, there are a lot of other colours here as well. One thing I should mention though is there is no velocity on this. The keyboard doesn't transmit velocity to the synth engine. You can't access velocity via external MIDI or USB either. And that's kind of a shame, because there is so much in the synthesizer in terms of sounds that to add that extra level of dynamics would be great. I mean, some may argue that actually having velocity on a synthesizer kind of makes it stand back a bit. If it's just on or off, it kind of is front and center. You know, you take your Juno 106s, those kind of things, which just sound great, and it's because there's no dynamics. But I think it's a shame that they couldn't have got that in here somewhere. Maybe switching it on or off via some sort of function would have been nice, but I guess there's just not enough room on the front panel to be able to dial in the sort of parameters that you would want to adjust with velocity. So that is a bit of a shame. Taking it back down, we go into square wave. Mod now affects pulse width. And we've got quite a nice range of pulse width there, and we can modulate that again with the LFO on this section. Texture in this case brings in a kind of a second wave. It goes up to an octave in I think that's semitones. Right, the next wave along is sync wave. Now sync wave is quite interesting. So sounds just like a sawtooth there, but the texture now effectively, this is like changing the pitch of a synced pair of oscillators. And you get some really nice colourful harmonics in there. In terms of modulation, it defaults to the envelope. So we get, basically we get the envelope modulating the amount of mod on the sync as a source. So if I want to modulate that with the LFO, switch to the oscillator mode, and then as soon as I bring any depth in, the LFO overrides the modulation from the envelope. Maybe bring a bit of delay in here. Into a whole new world of sound. And one thing you might notice when I switch the effect in, or changing effects while playing, does create a dropout in the sound. I'm guessing this must be a DSP limitation. Similarly, when you're switching oscillator types, you get a bit of a glitch as well. Just one of those things that you have to put up with. It's a shame, but I'm guessing it must be limited resources in a keyboard of this size. Next stage along is the filter. We go to our sawtooth wave here, just play a straight Sweep. It's not a lot of drive in there, but I think I can hear a little bit. We bring a little bit of resonance in. Bit more. Get these really quite nice harmonics. Get the resonance right up there. I'll probably need to take that down. Try that on a square wave. You notice you don't really get a loss of bottom end on these. But yeah, you're going to be getting stepping because it's 0 to 127 range on the MIDI, so there's no interpolation in between it and the synth engine, obviously. But I did notice that the harmonics that are stepped are very musically tuned. I think they might have actually tinkered with it a little bit. It does sound a little bit to me like a CS filter. So, you know, it's not specifically you know, wonderful analog, but it is actually quite musical. And if you get into sort of pad mode, let's just get, we're in poly, let's just take it up an octave. Get a bit of... does generate these sort of very musical harmonics, and the filter, you know, even though it's just a couple of faders, it really does have, it's sort of at the heart of this thing, and I was quite surprised at how nice it sounded. If you can get over the stepping, there's just some really lovely sort of quality to it. Additionally, we've got the ability to, or if I bring it along to the envelope section, which is the next part, we've got this fader here which takes it from amplitude generation. So the filter here, the envelope here is just doing this thing. If I bring the filter down and then take the fader, this actually introduces additional depth. You can dial in the filter depth. And actually, if we can get some pretty snappy stuff. So it is possible to, you know, with, again, limited controls, get quite a lot of stuff going on here. Finally, we've got an effects section here, which gives us 4 effects: delay, phaser, chorus flange, and distortion. Now these actually are pretty nice. Again, if I just bring, let's bring the delay in. You've just got depth and rate. There's nothing going on with, although we can get into that crazy feedback. It's actually, I like a synth with a delay on it. It's actually very useful. If we check the phaser out, and now a chorus flanger. You can get some pretty jet type stuff going on there. So, you know, that they have got extreme settings. And finally we got distortion. which is actually, I mean, I'll just turn it up full there. You can get some quite nice crunchy sounds. It's particularly nice on bass sounds. You can back it off a bit to get some extra stuff. Let's take a look at the other waves now, because some of these are very interesting. Let's take a look at the next wave up. This one is a couple of circles, and this is ring mod. So this affects the pitch of oscillator 1, and this is the pitch of oscillator 2. Very fine changes to the sound will actually create massive changes in tonal variation. We'll stick a bit of delay on that. And again, perhaps we want to modulate the oscillator. That's lovely, isn't it? I mean, kind of quite otherworldly and a million miles away from a super saw, I think you'll agree. So now we'll look at the final wave, which is a sort of, this is known as FM. So essentially we start off with just a sine wave. The texture now affects the amount of feedback, I guess. That's what it sounds like to me. So the amount of feedback. So you can create quite richly harmonic sounds. The mod sounds like the carrier, but it's actually a noise source in this case. Again, stick a bit of delay on it. Get some really quite lovely sound. Adding a bit of modulation via this oscillator. And you're getting something crazy, kind of clangorous. But again, if you take it down and you just go for something fixed, bring the oscillator, the envelope down, add some harmonics via the filter. Get some really quite lovely sounds. And I'm only really scratching the surface here. Even though all of these faders only really have 0 to 127 values, there's so much variation in between them in terms of texture and sounds. It's quite remarkable that they've managed to get quite so much into the synthesizer in terms of tonal variation. And like, I think the trick is with this is perhaps not to think of it like, you know, oh, it'll make great lead or bass sounds, which it will do okay. You know, they are quite beefy and they do sound quite fulsome. It's the stuff in between, the kind of the minutiae that really I find myself actually struggling to get on with the review, because every time I start tinkering with something, I find a little sweet spot that I just want to play with, and it just takes you away. You know, this is again, just using the FM synth. A bit of delay. Let's put a bit of chorus flanger. And you're off, you know. And I think that's where this synth really wins. As an instrument, musically, it feels very easy to connect with, you know. I mean, there are a lot of sounds that are capable of. I mean, obviously the problem is there's no memories, and I know that Yamaha are supposed to be releasing a Reface app which lets you just pull these in and, you know, you can store your settings. I would love to have that now, because I've been through so many sounds that I would like to have kept. I've got to try and keep them in my mind, because there's no way for me to actually access them. Similarly, there's a website, soundmondo.com, I think. It's supposed to have launched on September the 1st, hasn't actually launched yet, at least at the time of review. which again uses web MIDI and allows you to pull the sounds out of the synth. I'm guessing it sends a little command to dump the memory status, and then those sounds can then be available to others online and you can download your own. I mean, that sounds actually quite exciting, even though it seems a bit gimmicky. It's actually potentially got a lot of expandability. So as soon as we get memories for this, then I think it will make sense, because essentially, you know, we've got a polysynth here or a monosynth with all these other aspects to it. I mean, the big downside is for many is going to be, well, the price, you know, it is what it is. I think it's about $289 in the UK. I think it's street price is now $499 in the US. I know it was initially quoted as being a bit higher. So, you know, it's not cheap, but like I said, it's a solid build quality. And I think the point is about this is it's very musical, and whether if that's what you want, then perhaps you're prepared to pay a bit of a premium. The other thing, of course, is the mini keys. Some people are just never going to get past that, so move on. This is probably not for you. But for me, this is a bit of an unexpected surprise. I like the CS. I think it's got lots of potential, and I can stand here and just tinker with sounds for ages, and they just fall out of this thing. So from an instrumental point of view, it gets a big thumbs up from me. I think, yes, it's a little bit expensive, but try it. I think really that's the key to this. Try it, stick a pair of headphones on and just check it out. And I think you'll probably find you're won over in the end.